This episode of The Longest Day contains content that may be alarming to some listeners and involves mentions of death and suicide. Welcome to The Longest Day podcast. I'm Leah, your host and the founder of Broadstairs Consulting. We help rebuild relationships and facilitate effective dialogue. We are convinced that people matter and that conversations count, so we started The Longest Day, a series of conversations where we learn from the resilience, determination, and candor of our guests. As they look back on their longest days, our hope is that it will empower you to look forward. We hope their stories will be a part of shaping yours. Suzanne Knight is an award-winning expert on transformational change and the future of work. CEO and founder of Embolden human capital consulting firm, Suzanne works with organizations around the world, helping them anticipate and adapt to change so they can thrive rather than just survive. Through her own firm and nearly a decade at Deloitte, Suzanne worked with over 40 clients in 12 countries. Beyond her consulting work, she is an active angel investor with the Firehood, a startup advisor and tech founder. She has worked in organizational transformation for Walmart Canada and Philip Morris International. Suzanne has served as head of diversity, equity and inclusion for a consumer goods company, on the executive advisory council for Walmart Canada's Women in Retail program, and on the foundation board of the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. She volunteers as a Sick Kids innovator, mentor with Urban Squash Toronto, and is on the HR committee of JIAS. In 2023, she was recognised on the Peaks Emerging Under Age 40 Leaders List and the DMZ's Women of the Year. She has an MA in Industrial and Organisational Psychology and an MBA in Finance and Strategy. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for being willing to join us on The Longest Day. Perhaps you might like to tell us about your longest day.
Sure. So my longest day was a number of years ago, and it was actually a story that I've been very much dreading telling. I woke up this morning and thought, today is the longest day. And while I'm so glad to be part of this podcast, this is a very hard story for me to talk about. So my longest day happened when I was a business leader for a company in Toronto, and I had been enrolled for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years at the time. I had an employee who was really wonderful, but had had some changes, some behavior changes, some challenges, personal issues, and this employee had passed away very suddenly. It was, for me, the first time having to go through the experience of having a member of my team die, and to be the leader in a situation where we were all grieving so acutely. All of us were having such a hard time with it, but it's different when you're the leader of a team and you're supposed to be a point of comfort and a point of strength and stability at the same time that you are experiencing the pain, the challenge so personally. So that day I could talk about as a very long, very hard day. But the one that I actually had logged as the one I want to talk about for longest day was the funeral. And this longest day for me was so long because there was this duality of driving about an hour away from my home. I was by myself, absolutely dreading every moment of this event, because while it was an opportunity to honor the life of someone I so cared about, and someone I still do, someone I think about a lot, it was also a point where I would be interacting with her family and her friends and her kids. And it made this loss that we in the workplace felt, seem small compared to what her partner and children were going through. At the same time, I was also having regular life. I was very pregnant. I had 2 children at home. Children, they don't necessarily understand what you're going through. And you can have these really difficult events happen, whether it's in your personal or professional life, and your kids still expect you to be their mother. And so I was already balancing that piece of it. I also, being very pregnant, was looking to move into a home with a little bit of a larger yard, a little more space for the kids. This would be my third. And I was in the process of trying to negotiate the offer for this house at the same time as going through the hardest emotional situation I had ever gone through in my life. So this longest day, the reason why I wanted to speak about it is because it so felt like that experience of managing personal and professional, public and private, parent and leader and griever. And, thinking back, I felt like I was in this haze, but life was still continuing. And I remember sitting outside the funeral. It had just finished, and I was on the phone in my car having a conversation with the realtor, and she was asking me to make decisions about this house. And I remember just saying, I don't care. Like, you figure it out. I empower you. Like, you just figure it out. Because I had reached my emotional capacity to be able to handle stress and decisions. And, there was so much happening that day, but I'll say, in a nutshell, that was my longest day.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Perhaps let's zoom out a little bit. Were you surprised when you first heard the news?
I was very surprised. And I also would like to talk about why I was surprised, because looking back, there were so many signs that something was wrong. And I will also say, for context in this recording, that this person died under different circumstances. It was unexpected. This was a person who was not elderly. It was most likely suicide. And I was surprised, because the thing is that sometimes it can be the happiest, most joyful person in the room who's experiencing so much pain. And for me, having worked with this person, I knew that they were going through personal challenges. I knew it. And I remember hugging the person and saying, I'm here for you if you need anything, because her and I had worked so closely over that period. But at the same time, neither of us really called out that elephant in the room. And I was very surprised when this happened. But the person had actually not shown up at work for the previous few days. So when we ended up hearing what happened, we knew that something was happening, but it wasn't unusual for this person to miss days of work. What I learned later doing mental health first aid courses for leaders in the workplace was that sometimes there can be patterns. There can be things to pay attention to that I very much missed. And I absolutely have guilt and regret over having missed these signs. Some of them were behavior changes. Some of them were not showing up for work on the Friday or the Monday. What I learned is that this could be signs of people just not having that mental energy to put themselves through another day of getting out of bed, going to an office, and putting on a smile, particularly beginning or end of the week. This would happen, and the person would not show up, and it would be unexplained. I chalked it up to absences, and, I didn't tie it to mental health. And I never actually asked the question around root cause. So that's where I very much have guilt and regret. I will say, later, having gone through the workplace mental health training, I've put my teams through it ever since, because I saw the value, but, I should not have been surprised.
How much did your experience of that guilt as a leader affect your ability to grieve?
I would say it didn't affect my ability to grieve, because I very much grieved. I grieved for a long period of time. And I do think that the feeling of guilt was shared, and it should not have been. It should not have been, because I do have enough distance on the situation now to know that this was a horrible situation. It was not any one person's fault or responsibility. Somebody told me a story or shared an analogy lately with that idea of guilt and how we can feel that our contribution was the cause. And it was the story of having a glass of water and having your one drop be what overflowed it. But the thing is, you didn't fill the glass with water to get it to this point, right? So we feel that responsibility for the one drop when it was a series of absolutely difficult, challenging, unmanageable situations that led to that place.
One of the particular challenges, I suppose, as a leader is not only when someone in your team has mental health issues, but when you've got responsibilities to clients and other employees. How did you cope with the news and the aftermath of that news, as well as the run-up to the funeral as a team?
So as a team, we coped with the challenge, the pain, the grieving as a group, and we were more open with our emotions as a team than we had ever felt before. We, at the time, were outright crying in the office, and we had never done that before. The thing is that now it's been a number of years, and I've had the pleasure of working in a number of different workplaces, but out of the people who shared this moment, this horrible situation, we are still some of the closest colleagues and friends. And that actually went beyond layers of seniority or roles in the space or where we ended up going in terms of future companies or roles, employers. It was that shared moment of mutual grief that I think carried with us with a shared experience that cannot be replicated or duplicated, that you would never want to have happen. But when it happened, we connected in a way that we had never done before. And then you ask about how we kept it together to keep going about the day. So for me as a leader, it was a different role than others who really could take that step back. I think it delayed or maybe extended some of my grieving because I was certainly grieving, but I was also running on adrenaline in those early minutes, hours, days. The thing is that there has to be logistical, tactical activities that happen when an employee passes away. It's awful, but there needs to be a communication that goes out. Writing that communication that you never want to write, that you never want to see go out, it's awful. Packing up the employee's desk and her personal items and seeing that there, were handwritten notes or, a half-eaten box of chocolate. It's those little things that someone so human and almost stopped in their tracks when they're going through just regular life, and then they're not. So as a leader, you're going through where there are extended moments that draw out the grief. And I don't recall taking any time off. I don't recall taking any time away from the office to process. I was managing the situation while grieving. I also felt, knowing that this person had multiple children, had a partner, that my pain was so, secondary, tertiary, so minor compared to what others were facing, that I also, while I was going through it, was thinking, I can't make this about me. So that was the point of having all these feelings, but saying, I'm packing up the desk and taking these items, cards she had received, as I mentioned, the chocolates, the handwritten notes, put pictures. I went through my hard drive, took all the photos I could of this person, collected them to send to her family. Every one of those moments was full of grief. And, years later, I still feel that. People have passed away in my life. As they have for everyone. It's part of life. It's going to happen. But I think that one hit me so hard because it was so close, so unexpected. And I think that because I wasn't, really able to take time to step away and to process and grieve, the grief just kept going. So anyway, to answer your question, it was, a different experience than when you're able to take that time and process and come back having some understanding, some comprehension of what happened.
Well-being. You know the facts. Things are worse than ever. Burnout, trauma, absence, attrition. Leaders are tired of the empty gesturing about mental health. Leaders are resigned to ticking boxes, obliged to throw money away on medically flimsy, temporary solutions that have failed workforces. Adagio VR is the culmination of decades of work by a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Partners of the NHS and Oxford University, this is the world's first ever virtual reality program using clinical therapeutics accessible anywhere. Take meaningful action. Remove the need to cope. Adagio VR.
One of the challenges of leadership is that we also have to show up for ourselves. You were pregnant, you were moving house, you had a huge amount of other stressful things going on in your life. How were you supported through this season?
I wasn't supported. I was the support for others. There was very little that the employer did to support me. And, I think that was a lesson in and of itself as a leader to understand what supports people need going through a situation like that. Someone can be in a position of leadership and they're still completely human. And they're still grieving, they're still processing, whether it's a situation that happens in the workplace or outside, they still need help and support. And to answer your question, I was supported by my colleagues because they were going through the same situation that I was, but there wasn't anyone who came down and put their arms around me to say it's going to be okay. And that also is probably why it was so hard for so long to not have anyone from the outside give the comfort, but myself and, my colleagues on my team who were also going through their own pain.
What did you learn about yourself, partly through dealing with the practical arrangements and also the emotional burden of attending the funeral and also meeting the family? As you look back, what do you feel like this experience has taught you?
I think it taught me a lot about perspective, what matters and what matters less. It really made me think about the role of family and support network, the connections, the friendships. And, this was also right before or, shortly before the pandemic. So I went from having this realization of how important family and friendships are, as well as how important it is to focus on saying, mental health and wellness of myself, of my team, of the people around me, like that's non-negotiable, to then going into isolation for years. It was a strange time that way because mental health issues ramped up to a level that I had never seen before. And it was a pandemic in a lot of ways, including a mental health pandemic. So now on the other side of it, where I don't think that there's been a full recovery around how people are feeling and how they're processing. There's so much economic and political instability in the world. It's a whole other set of triggers for mental health challenges. And I'll say I certainly have been more focused since that incident on checking in with people in my life and making sure that they are okay, and checking in on myself as well to say, am I actually okay? Am I processing? Is there something I need? What do I need to do to make sure that my battery continues to recharge? And the same with those around me. And to be more explicit with the conversations, not to let it be implied but to actually say the words, are you okay? What can I do now to help you process what you're going through when I know people are having a hard time? To say, I'm here for you. And I mean that. I mean that authentically from my heart. I'm here for you. I want to help. So it's not a nicety. It's an honest, open request to be useful in those situations.
Professionally, how has your longest day propelled you into what you're doing now?
My longest day was the hardest day I had personally. And actually, it was the hardest day I had professionally. My role, I spend my days leading transformations, managing situations that can be complex, even chaotic, for various clients now as a consultant, and previously working for large organizations managing change. So I have always worked in the space of dealing with problems and issues, but they're typically not personal and they don't get to me. They're not emotional. Something can be going very wrong. A stakeholder can veto or say that they really don't like something that we want to implement. We can have, unexpected decisions where there's not budget for something that we were so eager to roll out, or a session gets canceled, or something we want to do gets deprioritized. Those can be hard, but they aren't personal. And I don't feel emotional or challenged by those in the same way at all that I felt about my longest day. And I think that's part of the understanding around what matters and perspective, to say things can go wrong, but they're surface and they're just about rolling with the flow and getting to the other side of those elements. All of that can be solved, but my longest day could not be solved. And that part is very difficult. And I'm sure that people who have lost those close to them, whether it's a person, an animal, anybody who's lost somebody close to them, you do have that sense of finality. And, that's the one that you can't go back on.
Did your longest day change your relationship with empathy?
It absolutely did. I look back and I had already been quite focused at that time on work-life balance. With my team, with myself, that was already something I had paid attention to. And I felt like if I created an engaging environment, an environment where we talked a lot about wellness, we took vacation days, that I was doing what I needed to do as a leader to create that environment, an inclusive, engaging, well environment. I think now, having gone through that, as well as, a few more years of leadership in different organizations in different contexts, my empathy goes to a different level of prioritizing the individual beyond all else. Jobs to me are jobs and work, and they're not life. And I will say now, I choose the individual every time. I choose my values, my integrity every time. And I'm so much more focused on that than the job, the ambition, the career, anything else, that it's really changed my relationship with the work that I do. I work for myself now, and my priorities, my values, my integrity, the way that I engage with others is my number one activity. And I can control that because I am my own leader and I am working in my own company. And I set the stage on what's right and how I treat my team and how we prioritize the work we do and how we do it. Certainly, I've made some big choices since that time, and I feel really good about them. Like, those choices were the right choices for me and the way that I work and who I work with and how we work together.
Switching gears, I can't imagine that on your longest day you were particularly concerned with food.
Mm-hmm.
But if you did have to live your longest day again, what food would you choose to keep you going through it?
So it's an interesting question. And actually, it's so interesting because on my longest day, the day of the funeral, I could not eat. I absolutely could not. And that's unusual for me. I'm a very steady eater, we'll say. But I'll say I actually have this light bulb memory from the day that I found out that this person had passed away, that I ordered Pan-Asian food to the office because all of us were so just shell-shocked. I don't know, I felt like we needed comfort food as a group. So we had sushi and noodles and all kinds of things delivered. But then I remember reading afterwards, even later that day, that the best thing to do in a situation of shock or grief is to eat light, healthy, clean food. And I had just ordered this buffet of like deep fried shrimp, sushi, and all kinds of things. I ordered wrong. But anyway, that's the moment I would say. Research would suggest that fruit, vegetables, and light foods are the best idea. I had ordered big-time comfort food for the group.
I'm sure that's an incredibly kind thing to have done, and I'm sure that everyone was grateful. It's such a hot topic, grief and loss, and that interface between personal and professional. But Suzanne, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and talking about that particular story and that day, and for alerting us to the responsibilities that we have as leaders to the mental health of those around us, particularly those we are responsible for at work. Thank you so much for being willing to talk about it at all, and thank you so much for choosing The Longest Day to share your story.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity to share.
You've been listening to a Broadstairs Consulting Limited podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Tune in soon to hear the next instalment of The Longest Day. Copyright 2024, production copyright Broadstairs Consulting Limited, all rights reserved.